Hello, friends, and welcome to another edition of Transformational Astrology. We're going to be talking, of course, about the full moon that's coming up at the end of the week here. It is a very interesting full moon in that it brings forward all the outer planets, and that means we're in for it. In a certain way, we're only in for what we have already signed up for. It's not terrible or dire. There is transformation in the air, and transformation isn't always easy. If you've been fighting it, you have a tougher struggle on your hands than if you've been open to it, as we always say. And so let me bring up the chart so you can get an idea of what it is we're talking about here. So here's the chart for the full moon. And you can see that approximately exactly opposite each other, the sun and moon at 18 degrees, the moon of Sag, 18 degrees and 53 minutes, the sun in Gemini. So what does that tell us about this chart? Well, a couple things. One is we notice that Pluto is at 18 degrees and 50 minutes of Capricorn. Now this isn't a major aspect, this is a semi-sextile aspect from the moon. It's a inconjunct or quincunx aspect from the sun to Pluto, but they're very exact, with 3 minutes of a difference. So we definitely have Pluto being shown up, and Pluto and Saturn are still parallel each other. As I've shown you before, the declination of Saturn is minus 22, almost 22, and the declination of Pluto, if we hit the right button, is minus 21 and about a third. So, or about a quarter actually. So basically, well within the 1 degree label of when a parallel becomes definitely very effective. So with Saturn and Pluto in collusion with each other, we are looking at structural change, we are looking at conservative empowerment, and then with Pluto emphasized by the very degree of this full moon, and the sun in this full moon, we are definitely seeing a big impulse towards transformational activity. Now, what field this might show up in is also represented very kind of fun here by Venus being an exact parallel, with Venus in Taurus with Uranus. The parallel is 10.2 versus 10.0. So that's a very close parallel. And Venus is at 3 degrees, 12 minutes. Mars is at 3 degrees, 14 minutes of Cancer. So that's a sextile. It's a perfect sextile. So with the Mercury at the midpoint, pretty much, at 4 degrees or at almost 5 degrees of Gemini. So we have a very interesting Mars-Venus configuration here, which means that there will be relationship stuff that comes up. That's just natural, isn't it? That Venus represents the female perspective, Mars represents the masculine, and they are making an opening. We consider sextiles to be openings. They are making an opening handshake with each other, which brings a lot of possibilities into play. I think it's a very good time for negotiation in relationships, especially with Mercury sitting right there. I think it's a very good time for innovative ideas in working in your relationships, whether they be close personal relationships, significant others, or whether they be a business partnership or even a friendship. There is that kind of juicy, anything goes Uranus attitude of maybe we can forge some new territory here. Maybe we can jump the tracks a little bit. If we're stuck in a rut, maybe we can jump out of it. So it's a very good time to explore relationship in the second half of the lunation cycle that began the last week in May. Now let's see. The other thing that I wanted to bring up as far as outer planet instigations is that with both Uranus, and of course remember that Uranus and Eris are still in conjunction, which brings Uranus into greater prominence. Eris magnifies whatever she touches, and it is an energy for soul intention. So we have the rebellious attitude of following soul intention no matter what, We've seen it in various different liberal activities, the so-called resistance. We even see it in the actions of the president in the White House, because he's following his inner guidance to do things that are a little bit out there, rebellious in a certain way, because, well, certainly rebellious against the rest of the world and pulling out of the Paris Accords, which the whole world is down on him for that. But he's sticking to his guns and trying to do what he thinks somehow is right. And so there's very interesting times, and there's a polarity right now. That polarity is also revealed by this ongoing trine, which is fading now between Saturn and Uranus. Saturn being more the conservative side of things, Uranus being more the forward-looking liberal side of things. So we do have all of that happening, which shows up in the body politic, and it also shows up in our individual lives. So sometimes it's easier to see it when it's all around us in what's happening in the society. But, basically there is a movement toward transformation that has been ongoing for years now with this Uranus-Pluto square. The Uranus-Pluto square, the hallmark of this decade, began in maybe 2009, 2010. It goes on all the way up to 2020 as far as the aftermath of those exact hits in the middle of the decade. So this is very interesting, powerful chart, and of course the moon is very close to Saturn in Sag, only another 6 degrees, is that right, separates them. So 12 hours after the timing of this full moon, at the very beginning of the day, 6 a.m. on the west coast, 9 a.m. on the east coast of the American continent, we have another 12 hours, and so by 9 p.m. on the east coast, by 6 p.m. on the west coast, we have the moon conjunct Saturn. So that brings the Saturn factor more closely into play, and we will all be probably aware of how much we have to make it count. We have a great deal of commitment that's implied by that Saturn empowerment that same day as the full moon. We have also the problem of trying to get something done. It's not always easy. We had Mars exactly opposite at the timing of the full moon, of the new moon that preceded this full moon that was launching the cycle. Mars was opposite Saturn. So this whole lunation cycle is all about trying to get things done, running into obstacles, builds character. They say that water running fast through a field, this is something astrologer Carolyn Casey brings up. Water running fast through the ditch doesn't soak the ground. Water running slowly through the ditch has nourishment involved in it, and that's what we're looking at with Saturn. It slows us down in order that we might more fully understand what it is we're up to. So all the outer planets, including Saturn, are involved, and I say all because Neptune is actually very closely aspected by Jupiter, 13 degrees versus 14, and in an inconjunct or quincunx aspect. And then also this full moon in mutable signs makes a T-square to Neptune. So Neptune is definitely part of this picture as well. And we might think of that as a warning in a way, because we can be fooled. We can fool ourselves. We can think that something's going one way when it's actually going another way, or we can deny reality in some fashion. We can also assign a spiritual meaning to what's going on, and sometimes that really helps with these difficult interpersonal relationship situations. If you look at the big picture, like how is this going to look in 100 years, or when I'm in my writing on my tombstone, how will it be recorded? That what was the essential point here? And looking at it from a big picture standpoint, looking at it from an other dimensional standpoint, recognizing that there's a spiritual dimension to all of our existence that really comes into play when we're working with each other and trying for the best that we can bring. So that's a summary. I do feel like this is a very important time, a powerful time. We can all seize the momentum. We can try to ride that tide that's surging now and try to surf it rather than be swept under or struggle with it. And that's where things are at. So we're going to take questions in a little bit if anybody does have questions online that are watching this. We didn't pre-announce this this full moon discussion, but if you have a question that's of general nature, go ahead and you can send it in there, and we'll talk about that a little bit. And then one thing I wanted to mention also is another outer planet energy, which is Eris. Eris was very prominent at the timing of the new moon, and that was because Mars was right there at 23, which is right here. And now it's further. Sort of Mars has been opposite Saturn and making a sextile aspect to Eris. And of course, even right now, Saturn is making a very close aspect to Eris. So there's still a lot of Eris in the whole situation, and a lot of Eris and Uranus. And so I do want to mention that Eris, I believe, my research has backed it up. It was a hypothesis before I started my research, which was 7 or 8 years in the making, and published that book that I'm sure most of you know, The 10th Planet. Well, that's received quite a bit of cred lately. For example, a recent conference up in Seattle, Stephen Forrest was talking about how Eris was definitely a powerful factor in charts, a planet, in fact. And when you think about it, Pluto is a planet. You know, I think in his lecture he said, how many people here, even though Pluto is designated a dwarf planet, think that Pluto is a planet? And of course, all the hands go up, right? And then he says, and how many people here, in spite of the fact that it's considered a dwarf planet, think that, in fact, Eris is a planet? And quite a few hands went up. It was close to 50%, not quite, maybe 50, but people are starting to catch up. The astrologers, that is to say, astrology students, astrology professionals, are beginning to catch on to this fact that really it's the same exact category as Pluto. It's in the Kuiper belt, bigger. Not exactly bigger. It's about the same size as Pluto, but it's far denser and far brighter. Further out, a 550-year orbit that takes a long time to go through Aries, so it's moving quite slowly now. It's at Pelion, which is the furthest point. But when it gets close to the Sun, it's actually on the opposite side of things. 250 years from now, or 275 years from now, it will be within the orbit of Pluto. So it's has a lot to do with Pluto. The orbits intersect. I mean, as far as their distance. So that was a hypothesis that we have a planetary energy, and then I find that anytime it makes contact in a natal chart with a personal planet, that personal planet is emphasized. You can see all the evidence for that in my book. Also, the house position is emphasized, and I challenge you, look at where the middle degrees of Aries, or roughly, come in your chart, and you may find that there's nothing else in that house, but that house, it does make sense that there's an emphasis there. So I don't want to go on and on, belabor the point, but I think it's a very, very important point for us all to recognize in astrology as we work with these new energies, the ones beyond Pluto that were named dwarf planets, that we recognize that they are potentially quite powerful in charts, and it does bear more research. But I think that time is coming that we'll recognize Eris as being a very important outer planet energy. I call it a feminine warrior energy for soul intention, finding what only you know you can bring, and sticking with that no matter what, being willing to face the odds against all odds, doing what you cannot not do. All the feminist leaders have had it, all the paradigm shifters I could find have had a strong Eris. There's a lot of evidence in Einstein's chart, including the transit of Eris across his sun degree was very significant for his life work. So that's what I wanted to say about Eris. And do we have any questions that came up that are maybe just one? Okay.
Nikita asks, could you please give some guidance on the significance of interpreting full moons on the angles and aspecting natal nodes? The moon is exactly conjunct her descendant and squaring her nodes within 4 degrees.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. Of course, any time a full moon hits your chart, it's going to be significant. And that's if it hits a personal planet in your chart, across the ascendant descent of the chart, very significant. So you might say it's a turning point of some kind, a new recognition, a new phase of recognition coming into your power, perhaps in a certain way that you hadn't looked at that before, coming into a different concept of relationship, since we're talking about the ascendant-descendant angle of the chart. And with the north node, or with a nodal axis, 4 degrees off the nodal axis, that makes it even more powerful, of course. So there again, it follows the same principle that if you have a full moon and you find that it's on your moon, on your sun, on your Mercury, whatever it might be, or close to your north node, these are important moments, and these are times to pay attention. What can you do concretely when you know things are up like that? Well, my recommendation is to witness everything that's going on with you, to silently sit there and say, oh, I can feel reactivity arising, but not reacting. Saying, excuse me while I go beat up this pillow because I'm feeling a lot of anger right now, but not spraying it out on anybody else. Just being a witness to your own inner world is very, very important always, but even more so when things are in serious flux, as that would indicate when the full moon is on your descendant. Well, okay, I guess that's it for today. We're going to just call it at that. Nice talking to you all again, and I hope you got something out of this description. Let me see if I can get back to the other way. So, until next time, this is Henry signing off, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care.